Hey guys, this video is going to show you how damage mechanics and calculations work in the new Oblivion Remastered. I put this together by testing a bunch of scenarios and enchantments on the PC, which gave me access to the console in order to be able to manipulate different variables and attack combinations. So if you're curious to learn more and want to save yourself the hassle of playing around with the console or testing formulas manually, this video's got you covered. So as a fair warning to start, I do cover the most basic concepts for the benefit of beginner players. So if you're a more seasoned player that's already got a pretty good grasp on how weapon rating, sneak attack multipliers and that kind of thing works, you may want to skip ahead a few chapters. So with that, let's start with the basics. When I talk about damage in this video, I'm going to be talking about damage in two different components: physical damage and enchantment or magical damage. So physical damage is the piece that takes into account your weapon rating and attack multipliers from things like sneak attacks and power attacks. On the other hand, magical damage is more about damage that you can get from enchantments and enchantment-like effects such as magic spells. The way Oblivion Remastered plays right now, magical damage seems to provide the most viable path to stacking huge amounts of damage, and this is pretty essential, especially if you're looking at tackling the game in the master difficulty or even the expert difficulty. If you're not playing those difficulties, like, you probably don't need to get super into the weeds of that, but it's good to know, because honestly, stacking magic effects in specific ways can let you take a flare that does 6 points of fire damage and turn that into a bomb that does like 200 points of fire damage on an enemy, so it's pretty fun to do. Purely for that reason, I suggest you incorporate magic damage into your build, even if you're thinking about specializing in sneak attacks with bow and dagger. Magic damage is just going to open you up to a lot more possible combat styles and options, and make the game more fun all around. So first things first, let's dig into physical damage and power rating. So the game calculates weapon rating by using base damage values for different weapons and adjusting that base damage value through a formula that takes into account the points you have and the attributes and skills that govern that specific weapon. That weapon rating calculation also considers weapon health, and it will decrease when your weapon's health or durability starts to decrease. So the closer you are to 100% weapon health, the higher your weapon rating will be. So maximizing weapon rating is largely about maximizing your attribute points and skill points that govern that particular weapon, and just trying to keep your weapon health as close to 100 at all times. So archers will focus on agility as the attribute and marksman as the skill. Swords might focus more on strength and blade, and so on and so forth. Both attribute points and skill points will increase your weapon rating, but increasing skill points early will have a much larger impact on damage increase, as I'm about to show you. So as a fairly new archer class character, let's say I have 50 points of agility and 50 points for marksman. Now let's say I had the chance to add 50 points, either all to agility or fully to the marksman skill. If I put all 50 points towards agility, my weapon rating will increase by about 25%. But if I put those 50 points towards the marksman skill instead, my weapon rating will increase by 80%. So by increasing my skill points early on, I'm going to have a much larger impact on my weapon rating, and this is probably like the thing that makes sense to increase early on. Something to consider if you're doing fortify spells, armor enchantments, and that kind of thing. Keep in mind, the damage bonus you get from increasing attributes and skills cap at 100. So this means that if you ended up putting 150 points into marksman through leveling up and putting fortify spells on your armor, you're not actually going to benefit from those extra 50 points that you have over 100. So this is probably a good reason to look at different weapons to level up and different skills. Again, like, I'm using an archer class right now, and I've gotten my marksman skill up to 100, and now I might focus on getting my blade up to 75, so I can start to benefit from the bleed effect and the combat situations I get into when I can't just fully take down an enemy with the archer. To increase specific skills early on, you can seek out specific trainers that can train you on whatever specific skill you're looking to level up in exchange for gold, and you'll be able to do this up to 5 times per level. You can also seek out blessing stones all throughout Cyrodiil, which will let you learn different fortify attribute or fortify skill spells. Learning any fortify skill spell will essentially result in you learning that spell, and then when you visit an enchantment station to add enchantments to your own armor, you'll be able to add a fortify skill effect to any skill, even if it's not the skill that you learned at a specific blessing stone. You can get access to enchantment altars at the Arcane University by getting all 7 recommendations from the Mages Guild outpost throughout Cyrodiil, or you can also access enchantment altars via Frostcrag Spire near Bruma. The second option does require you to fork out about 5,000 in gold or so it might be a bit steep at earlier stages in the game. And I mean, for this reason, you might be better off just doing the Mage's Quest early on and getting access to the university. So you can do that for free. Well, not free, but without paying 5k. Last thing to note about weapon rating, which I briefly mentioned earlier but is really important, is lower weapon health can take a big chunk out of your weapon rating to the tune of 50% when you're getting really close to 0. So that'll basically slash your potential physical damage in half. So yeah, it's definitely a good thing to keep an eye on repair hammers and the rest of it, but also consider the armor skill tree, which will eventually let you repair weapons beyond 100 health and durability, and therefore allow you to increase that weapon rating even more. So to quickly recap weapon rating, skill points make a big difference in your physical damage output. From that perspective, the specialization in class that you pick early on in the game actually has a pretty large impact in terms of how quickly you can level up these skills, which most impact the damage you do with your primary weapon. This is also important because as you unlock higher levels on specific skills, you'll be able to unlock bonus perks such as bleed damage, which will give you extra damage and other beneficial power-ups. That selection of specialization skills and major skills happens super early in the game when you're talking to Boris right before entering the sewers. So the importance of this is often overlooked if you're a newer player, just given how early it all happens and how much information is thrown at you. So when you first create your class, your choices will essentially result in the 21 different skills that you have being bucketed into different sections and categories. You're going to end up with base skills, which are neither specialization skills nor major skills. And these are basically the skills that are going to take the most amount of experience points and time to level up. On the other side of the spectrum, you're going to have skills that are both major skills and specialization skills. So the major skills will be the 7 skills that you picked when selecting your class. You can either pick these skills individually if you create a custom class, or you can select a pre-made class that has those 7 skills pre-selected for you. And the specialization skills will be based on the specialty that you picked, which can either be combat, stealth, or magic. And again, just to reiterate, the reason this matters in the conversation about physical damage is because when a skill is both a major skill and specialization skill, you're just gonna hit level 100 much quicker on that specific skill, and that's gonna allow you to unlock some of those perks and bonuses that I mentioned earlier, which can become pretty important later in the game. To play around with how different choices impact your points allocations, check out the Oblivion Character Planner calculator. This calculator will let you see how different race and skill specialization selections will impact your major skill and specialization skills going into the sewers. So I've linked that in the description below. Moving on now to attack multipliers. Attack multipliers are fairly self-explanatory. In addition to increasing your weapon rating, attack multipliers are probably one of the other biggest variables that you can control in terms of letting you increase raw physical damage. Sneak attacks can give you an attack bonus that can be as high as 8x on daggers. And for other weapons like bows, the sneak attack can usually go up to 3x, but still, that's a pretty significant damage boost when you factor in the fact that you're usually away from an enemy and you're going to be able to get, 2 or 3 shots on them before they get close enough to attack you. Similarly, power attacks can increase your damage by 2x or 3x, which will allow you to take a sword that has a weapon rating of 40 and theoretically do about 120 points of damage in one power swing, assuming there's no enemy resistances or armors at play. Last thing to cover in the area of physical damage before moving on to magic damage is enemy weaknesses and resistances, which come in two forms: enemy armor ratings and enemy weaknesses or resistance to normal weapons. Enemy resistances to armor can decrease your damage by as much as 85%, depending on the enemy's armor rating, according to the formula that's been published in the unofficial Elder Scrolls Pages forum. Similarly, an enemy weakness or resistance to normal weapons can further impact that number if you're using a normal weapon. And again, that's just going to be based on the resistance that the enemy has to normal weapons. So ghosts are an example of an enemy that has 100% resistance to normal weapons, which explains why you can't hit them at all with regular weapons unless it's Daedric or Silver. In testing this out on various difficulties, I don't think this armor rating multiplier currently factors into Oblivion Remastered, as my damage output was essentially what I expected it to be in terms of the weapon rating calculations I did. So I'm going to do additional testing on this, but for now, I don't think this is currently making an impact on Oblivion Remastered. At least I haven't seen how it does, so I'm not going to focus about it too much on this video. When it comes to enemy resistances and weaknesses to normal weapons, it is possible to inflict enemies with weakness to normal weapons in the game, and this is just a different way of increasing the physical damage that you inflict. In testing this out, I found you can't really stack weakness to normal weapons even if you have 5 or more of these magic scrolls. Each scroll just seems to reset the timer of the spell and keeps the enemy's weakness at give or take 20%. You can stack another 14% or so of weakness to normal weapons if you do a power attack with a blade once you're above the journeyman level. But this doesn't really make a meaningful difference compared to what you're able to do with stacking weaknesses to magic effects. The scrolls are also not the easiest to come by, so it's kind of random and very much dependent on luck. So for those two reasons, I wouldn't recommend this as a viable strategy to increase damage output consistently. Still, it's helpful to briefly discuss it to introduce the concept of weakness stacking, which gets us to the funnest part of today's video: weakness stacking for doing crazy amounts of damage. So the magic damage we're about to discuss here follows its own formula, which is separate and distinct from all that physical damage stuff we've looked at up to this point. The magic damage won't benefit from sneak attacks, it won't benefit from power attacks. Hell, I won't even care about the condition of your weapons. So none of that will have any bearing on what we're about to talk about here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a dagger that uses weakness to magic and weakness to fire enchantments. And once I've stacked those weakness effects on an opponent, we're going to hit the opponent 5 times. And then we're going to hit him with a 6-point flare to see how much damage it does after we've stacked up all of the weaknesses. So on this first dagger I have here, I've added a weakness to magic enchantment effect of 100% for 6 seconds. I've also added a second enchantment, which is a weakness to fire effect of 100% for 6 seconds as well, so they're consistent. Blade skill has been reset down to 25, just to try to minimize physical damage to about 2 points per hit. And then the target here has exactly 200 points of health, so I expect the 5 dagger hits will take about 10 points of physical damage health. And then after we do those 5 hits, we'll just see how the weaknesses stacked up for magic and element. So after 5 hits, this guy's down to minus 500 weakness to magic and minus 100% weakness to fire, according to the values from the Oblivion console. And then the health went down about 10 points as expected. So now each flare is doing 60 points of damage, which at 190 health he had going in means he would need another 2 to 3 flares to fully go down. So all in all, the flare attack went from 6 points to 60 points for 10x increase, which is pretty good. If instead of using a flare for 6 points, use a fireball, which does 30 points of damage and has a slightly larger radius, that would be 300 points of damage in one spell, of which you can further amplify to other enemies in the surrounding area. So All in all, like that's pretty powerful right there. Weird thing here is though, if I reverse the order in which I put those enchantments on the dagger, I'm actually going to be able to do way more damage on this guy. Check it out. So here I have the second dagger. It's identical to the first one except for the fact that I reversed the order of the enchantments. So now weakness to fire comes first and weakness to magic comes second. Everything else stays the same. After 5 hits, he ends up with negative 500 weakness to magic, as well as negative 500 weakness to fire, which is different from test case number 1, where weakness to fire was only 100% after 5 hits. So now if I hit him with the flare, and he's at 190 points of health, the flare is now taking most of his remaining health, except for about 10 points, which means the flare is now doing around 180 points of damage. So simply by reversing the order of enchantments, that flare is now doing like 30 times over the original and 3 times higher than test case number 1. So if we look now at how we get to 60 points and 180 points, I would have actually expected both of these to do a little bit more based on how I'm reading the formulas. And I've read that my logic and thinking here step by step. The second thing that's pretty strange is the fact that the order of which these enchantments go makes such a big difference in terms of how the weakness is increased. So I don't fully understand why the order of enchantment matters. Like my theory here is that weakness to fire doesn't actually stack, but instead the effect was amplified by 5x on hit number 5 from the second dagger, which applied 500% weakness to fire in one shot. One other strange thing here is that the attacks in both cases were actually lower than what I would have expected them to be based on my understanding of the formula here. I expected attack number 1 to do 72 points of flare damage and attack number 2 to do 216 points of damage. But both came in slightly lower than that. So to get to those actual values that we saw, I would have to plug in 400 magic weakness while keeping the weaknesses to element fire exactly as we saw them in the Oblivion console. Intuitively, I don't know why this would be happening, like why I would have to reduce magic by 100. But this seems to be the only way that I can reconstruct both numbers by the same set of adjustments. Whatever the case is, for now I would say the main takeaway here is that the order of enchantment matters, and just make sure you're putting the elemental weakness first, because that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. Just one other thing to keep in mind, try to make the enchantments extra spicy, like the ones from the example here will deplete the magic charges pretty quickly. So in practice, you might want to tone these down a notch and make use of physical damage multipliers in other situations where, you know, you can sneak up on enemies and maybe give the magic items a bit of a rest. If inventory space is not an issue, you can create a bunch of these different enchanted items and kind of go through depleting all of them, and then use a Varla stone or something to charge all of them at the same time, and then you can kind of redo that cycle again. So you don't have to use soul gems on charging 5 different ones. You can just use a single Varla stone to charge everything all in one. And with that, we are at the end of today's video. I hope you found the information helpful, and if you did, please remember to hit that like and subscribe button. Cheers.
I'm glad that's done. I need a nap.